The RTX 4060 Ti 8GB are not exactly well received by many due to an obvious reason. That is, the performance is not up to expectation. However, do you still remember that Nvidia is also releasing the 4060 Ti with a whopping 16GB of memory? We will be taking a look at this exact card just to see how much of a difference does the extra memory will do and if it's really worth spending that extra $100 for. Since there will be no Founders Edition available for this model, the RTX 4060 Ti 16GB will only be available through the board partners. The one we have here is the Gigabyte GeForce RTX 4060 Ti Gaming OC 16G. The design and specs are identical to the 8GB model. Well, that is, except for the 16GB worth of memory. The triple fan cooler has a 2.5 slot design that can easily fit into a lot of PC cases. For the power requirement, Gigabyte recommends at least a 500 watts power supply for this card. Since it has a rated TGP at 165 watts, you can power it with a single 8-pin PCIe power cable. Now for the display outputs, unlike the commonly seen 3 DisplayPort and 1 HDMI port combo, this card actually has a 2 DP and 2 HDMI, which is good. And before we look into the numbers, here are the test system specs for your reference. Okay, for the rest of performance, although the extra memory does help with the performance in a way, the difference is almost negligible and not enough to make it a fully 4K gaming capable card. As expected, games are much more playable as we scale down to 1440p. Then again, the extra memory does not seem to have too much advantage on the overall raster performance. The only observable performance gain is from Watch Dogs Legion, which is known to consume a lot of VRAMs. When it comes to 1080p gaming, all the tested cards perform really well. However, I do want to point out that the older 3070, despite having lesser memory, is still performing better than the 4060 Ti 16GB on a number of occasions. So again, the 16GB of memory does not seem to help much with the rest of performance. As for the ray tracing performance, we just kinda gave up on 4K resolution after seeing the results. Some titles might still be playable at this resolution, but not the majority, especially when we're talking about the highest graphics settings and ray tracing at Ultra preset. With resolution set to 1440p, we can see the 4060 Ti 16GB actually performs better than the 3070. The advantage of having 16GB of memory can be observed in titles like Forza Horizon 5, Watch Dogs Legion, Far Cry 6, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Things are not exactly the same for 1080p though, as we can really see a very similar performance on the 4060 Ti 8GB, 4060 Ti 16GB and 3070, which with Watch Dogs Legion being the only actual titles that takes advantage of that extra memory. Moving on to the game's performance with DLSS 3. As one of the members in the RTX 40 series lineup, the 4060 Ti can take advantage of the feature for a significant performance boost in games that has this feature available. With 16GB worth of memory, you can actually see some notable performance gain in 1440p resolution. However, to our surprise, there are a few occasions where the 8GB models performs better than the 16GB models in 1080p resolution. At this point, I can only say that the 16GB memory will only show the worth when you are actually gaming at 1440p resolution and games title that will actually take advantage of that much memory. Now for the power draw and thermals. It is identical to what we have observed with the 4060 Ti 8GB. Aside from the very similar performance it can deliver, the power draw when the GPU performs at its peak is at 165 watts. The 4060 Ti is technically delivering a performance that is similar to the 3070 but draws almost 40% less of power. And let's not forget that it's using a single 8-pin PCIe connector instead of the 12-volt high power connector. As for the thermals, the highest GPU temperature during peak load is recorded at 72.5 degrees Celsius and the hotspot temperature at 89.8 degrees Celsius. You might see a different result on other 4060 Ti, but it should be not too far off from what we have observed here. So that's pretty much it for the test we have. Now I will say that the 4060 Ti is still a decent card, but here's the problem. Price is my biggest concern for the RTX 4060 Ti 16 gigs, which I think the $499 US price tag is actually very expensive for the negligible performance gain over the 8 gigs variant. It would be much more reasonable if Nvidia only released the 16 gigs variant and price it at the supposed $399 US price tag, or otherwise lower the price of the 8 gigs variant. If you take power efficiency into consideration, the RTX 4060 Ti is a very decent card for 1440p gaming. Sadly, the 16 gigs memory does not offer much unless the game can complete more than 8 gigs on the memory. So, will I ever recommend the 4060 Ti 16 gigs? Well, if you're looking for the best bang for the buck in gaming, no, I will not recommend it. As seen from our test results, the RTX 4060 Ti 8GB is still a better choice for gaming despite having lesser memory. The only time I will consider recommending the 4060 Ti 16GB is probably for tasks like AI inference or graphics intensive workloads that will actually take advantage of that 16GB worth of memory. In other words, this is a good entry card for those who are using it for VRAM intensive workloads. And yes, so that's all for this video. What's your take on the 4060 Ti 16GB? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Okay, go on.